the key point. February and July. Condoleezza Rice's remarks were July 29, 2001, so 6 weeks before 9/11. Okay. So 6 weeks before 9/11, Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction. We, in her words, had been able to keep his arms from him. He was not a threat to his immediate neighbors, much less the United States. And then, wow, as we all have heard so many times, after 9/11, please complete the sentence.
Everything changed.
And so we were being asked to believe when Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld got up and said, Saddam Hussein has all manner of weapons of mass destruction. He's a threat to the United States of America, as well as to his immediate neighbors. Weeks after 9/11, we were being asked to believe that weapons of mass destruction descended like manna for a soft landing on the sands of Iraq, where God made that terrible mistake of putting our oil. It was a no-brainer, folks. You know, you didn't have to be a crackerjack intelligence analyst to realize that something really smelled bad. What we were witnessing was the introduction of a new kind of intelligence analysis. It fit in with a lot of these strains of what the administration was introducing. It's called faith-based this, faith-based that. But we never thought we would see faith-based intelligence. Okay. Now I want to tell you what faith-based intelligence is worth. And for that I'm going to draw on my Irish heritage. Right? I'll tell you a little story, it doesn't take long. There were these two nuns going home of an evening from the hospital where they worked in Belfast. And don't they run out of petrol halfway to the convent? They stopped the car, get out, looked under the hood, tried to find a gas can. All they could find was a bedpan from the hospital. So they took the bedpan, filled it up with petrol. We're coming back to the car. One nun is unscrewing the gas cap, and the other is. These bedpans are very unwieldy when they're full. Maybe some of you know that. Struggling with the. And all of a sudden, screeches to a halt, a big limousine, fancy one. You know, one with kind of press a button, and the window goes down by itself. Who's there but the Reverend Ian Paisley, the head of the Protestants in Northern Ireland. He sizes up the situation with one nun unscrewing the gas cap and the other one struggling with this bedpan, and he says, "Sisters, I don't agree with your religion, but I do admire your faith." That's when we formed our little group. We now have 67 veteran intelligence professionals for sanity. You can Google us, look us up on the web. Last weekend, we spent all weekend getting a statement out on torture, and I can talk more about that later. We just thought that it would be necessary for intelligence professionals to have their input into the decision-making of the Senate this week, which we are appalled to see. Passed an Attorney General who could not bring himself to say that waterboarding is torture, because if he said that, our president and the senior officials in our government would have been liable under our law and the international law for prosecution for torture. Okay? I mean, it's so convoluted it's hard to describe. There were some moments in this whole process of the prostitution of our intelligence process. The terrible estimate, the worst one ever produced, which said that Saddam Hussein had all manner of weapons of mass destruction, just a year after Condoleezza Rice said he didn't have any. Okay? You know, I used to chair these estimates. They're very important things, and they are the sort of the supreme genre of intelligence analysis. The director has to sign it on the cover, and he gives it to the president. Okay. Now, the way it works is you have representatives of the various intelligence agencies around the table, and so you say, all right, the question is, how soon can Saddam Hussein have a nuclear weapon? Defense Intelligence Agency, 3 years. The CIA, 2.5 years. The State Department. Well, the State Department, to its great credit, said this: you put us in a very difficult position because you're asking us to predict the end of a program that we don't believe has started yet. Now, to their credit, they took a long footnote and they said that in very diplomatic language. But you know what that reminds me of? Our second daughter was a history major at the University of Virginia, and she sent me a cartoon halfway through, which was a cartoon, a BC cartoon, you know, the guy, okay? He's standing up on a rock, and his daughter is cringing in front of the rock, and he's got this big stone tablet. It's clearly a report card, okay? And he's reading, and the daughter is cringing, and the caption says, "Oh, great. History, F. You flunked something that didn't even happen yet." Oh, thanks. I thought I was the only one that really think that's funny. So the State Department is being asked to predict the end of something that didn't even happen yet, okay? To their great credit, they resisted that. Now, the good news is that the head of estimates now is Tom Finger, and he comes from the State Department. And that's why, to my great relief and surprise, we've had at least 3 honest estimates out of the intelligence community. First one, Iran can't possibly get a nuclear weapon until early to mid next century. Is that what Dick Cheney was saying? No way. Okay. Second one, terrorism, international terrorism is up by a factor of 7 because of our invasion of Iraq. Did they want to hear that? No. Last one, January, February of this year, Iraq is going to hell in a handbasket. Now, they used other language, okay? But there was nothing at all in that estimate to justify any prospect of success from a surge. You guys know what the surge is all about, right? The surge is designed to prevent the President and Cheney from losing the war before they go out of office, okay? So put 30,000 more kids in from the small towns of this country. Maybe we'll be lucky. Well, maybe we'll be lucky. There's no way that we can prevail militarily there. And to VIPS credit, we've been saying that for more than 4 years now. We issued a statement on November 3rd, 2003, saying this war is unwinnable. Hear that? Unwinnable. All caps, okay? It was a no-brainer. You know, anybody with a touch of gray in their hair who knows about Vietnam knows you can't do this, okay? People don't like you to come in, invade, and occupy their country. Even if you put in 500,000 people, it still wouldn't work. And of course, it didn't have anything to do with weapons of mass destruction, did it? Didn't have anything to do with non-existent ties between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, did it? What did it have to do with?
Oil.
Oil. What else? Pardon?
Racism.
Military bases? You know, we don't say permanent anymore. We say,
Enduring.
what do we say?
Enduring.
Enduring military bases. What's the difference between? If all those enduring young military bases, I guess enduring sounds a little bit more endearing, I suppose. Huh? Okay. Give me a break. What's the difference between enduring and or permanent? So those were, and also not an inexorable factor was our perceived, or Israel's perceived, objective of making that part of the world safer for Israel. That's a supreme irony, isn't it? Because when we went in there, how many terrorists were there in Iraq?
None.
Well, they were a couple on sort of house arrest or retirement there. But Saddam Hussein was not doing anything other than giving money to the families of suicide bombers in Palestine. Do I condone that? Of course not. That's a far cry from sponsoring lots of terrorism. Okay? Now it's crawling with terrorists. So Israel is in more danger, in my view, now than at any time since 1948. And I can develop that thought later if you like. It all has to do with this very myopic policy that might makes right, and they're just not going to be able to do it unless they take off and try to slaughter 4 million Palestinians who still live there. So let me dispel just a couple of the myths that occurred, just because you know a lot of kind of stuff that I usually say, but maybe some of you are a little troubled by this. For example, how about this one? The president, George Tenet, the head of the CIA, that there were weapons of mass destruction. We really believed there were weapons of mass destruction there. We really believed there were weapons of mass destruction there. You see, if you say it 3 or more times, then more people will believe you, just like we don't torture, right? Okay. That's bull, folks. That's male bovine excrement. And we can prove it now because we have documentary proof, okay? We have the Downing Street memos. We have the conversation between Anzar, the Spanish Prime Minister, and Bush. We have conversations between Bush and the British and so forth. But we also have this, and this is something that I find that not many people know. How many people know this? That although CIA was justifiably criticized for not having any human spies in Iraq, they did get one that was worth all the ones they didn't have. Who is that I'm talking about? Anybody? I mean a good one. I mean a good one. Who? Kamel? Yeah, this is good. Okay, this was Saddam Hussein's son-in-law who defected in '95. And what did he tell us? There aren't any weapons of mass destruction. So we said, how do you know? He said, well, I happen to be in charge of the nuclear, chemical, biological, and rocket programs. My father-in-law put me in charge. Yeah, but how do you know they were destroyed? I ordered them destroyed. Yeah, but how do you know they did it? I went and I looked and they were destroyed. And ask Scott Ritter, you know, they were destroyed, okay? So that's really good. 1995, we knew that. And just in case Condoleezza Rice would say, well, maybe that was known in the bowels of the agency, but nobody, it didn't rise to my level, well, that's bull. Because Newsweek was given the debriefing report from Hussein Kamel, okay, 6 weeks before the attack on Iraq. 6 weeks before. Given the interrogation report, stamped secret and all that stuff, but given. What did they do with it? Anybody remember? They put it in their little periscope section, you know, a couple little paragraphs. Oh, by the way, Saddam Hussein's son-in-law says there aren't any weapons of mass destruction. This is 6 weeks before the war, folks, okay? Did any other paper pick it up? The Baltimore Sun, to its credit, had a little piece on it, but that was it, you know? What I'm talking about is something different. What I'm talking about is this spy who was worth all the ones we didn't have, and he was the Iraqi foreign minister, Saddam Hussein's foreign minister. My former colleagues pulled every trick out of their tradecraft book, lots of money, and called in lots of chits from liaison services and recruited in place the Iraqi foreign minister. His name is Naji Sabri. He's now living in some luxury in the Middle East. And he told us what was going on. He had direct access to Saddam and everyone else. And this happened in the middle of 2002, 7 months before the war started. What did he tell us? Well, he told us lots of things which we could verify. And then he told us, and besides, there aren't any weapons of mass destruction, so don't worry about that, okay? Well, our guys, my former colleagues, said, wow, you know, number one, we have a news source that we can be proud of. Maybe this was get us back in the graces of the White House. We're doing our job finally. And number two, wow, what explosive information. Hello, we need to come down to see you all. We have a news source. And yeah, we think the president might be interested in hearing that. Tomorrow afternoon? Okay. We're down the next afternoon and they present this to the president and his 5 chief advisors for national security affairs. They tell them they can be forgiven for this, I suppose. They spent the first 5 minutes bragging about how exactly they went turned him. I mean, that's technical intelligence term. They recruited him, so he's working for the United States, not any longer for Saddam Hussein. And then they said, now, Mr. President, you told us a lot of things, A, B, and C, and you also told us that there aren't any weapons of mass destruction. That was the reaction, folks. A stony silence. Now, I don't know, chalk it up to naivete or whatever. I think they expect a sort of, what? Tell me more about this source. How does he know? Or, you know, or maybe, none of that, folks. A stony silence, and they were told, okay, we can leave now. They checked the next morning. The deputy director called down the White House and said, we have still more reporting from Naji Sabri. Do you want us to send it down electronically, or should we bring it down? And they were told, thanks but no thanks. We're not interested in any further reporting from Najib Sabri. It's not about weapons of mass destruction. It's about regime change. This is July, August of 2002, folks. The same month that George Tenet, the head of the CIA, was telling his British counterpart, don't worry about the evidence. The evidence, the intelligence, and facts are being fixed around the policy. That's not the way intelligence is supposed to work. So be aware. Now, how many of you had heard this story about the Iraqi foreign minister? Okay, one, okay. Were you watching 60 Minutes? Is that, okay.
It was in a book.
It was in a book, all right. It is in a book by Tyler Drumheller, who was the division chief that was responsible for recruiting him, okay? It was also on 60 Minutes a year and a half ago, but if you missed that 60 Minutes, you don't find anything in the mainstream press about it. And that, my friends, is the biggest sea change that I've observed in watching things very closely in Washington for the last 45 years. We no longer have, in any real sense, a free press. Okay? That's big. We no longer have a free media. We used to have one. We had one during Vietnam. We had one during Watergate. We no longer have one. We do have the web. That's the saving grace. That's the consolation. We have to develop more imaginative ways to use the web, but we no longer have, in any real sense, a free press. You can see that by the fact that one or two of you knew about Najib Sabri. Well, I could go on like this. Maybe just a couple more dispelling myths. When the president says, you know, Saddam, he threw out the UN inspectors. That's why we had to go in after him. What's the response to that? It's a lie, isn't it? The British and we decided we would wrong foot, to use a British expression, wrong foot Saddam Hussein by demanding the most rigorous, the most intrusive inspection regime in recorded history. We're going to crawl over all your palaces. We're going to go into your boudoirs. And they thought for sure he would reject that, and he outfoxed them, didn't he? He said, okay, come on in. And they did come in, and they were combing through all that stuff and finding nothing. And the President of the United States, 4 days before, shock and awe, told the head of the UN, look, you better get your guys out of there because we're gonna strike Iraq. That's what happened. And to see the president saying that and then getting away with it, with the mainstream media not even correcting him, is really pretty hard to take. Last thing, I noticed that, well, one other thing. How do you answer this one, folks? We believe there were weapons of mass destruction, and every intelligence agency in the whole world believed that there were weapons of mass destruction. How do you answer that one? Pardon? Right. Where do you think the other intelligence agencies in the world get their information on such things? From the United States, okay? And even then, not many believed it. There's a good friend of mine, an analyst in Australia, he quit 9 days before the war. He said, this is cockamamie stuff. We know why you're going in there. I know why you're going in there. And the Australians were just marching in lockstep. The last thing I'd like to point out is this business about, well, the president's father yesterday was quoted as saying, so, would you rather have Saddam Hussein still alive? Is that what you want? No. You know, I wish that we could raise the level of discussion above that. But I think the answer to that is the suburban husband who goes out in the morning, get in his car to drive into Annapolis, and he guns on the motor, and his wife is there, and the 2 children say, "Bye, Daddy," and he sees a black spider going up the side of the garage. So he guns it into forward, knocks out the whole front thing of the garage and kills the spider. And his wife says, Harry, you gone crazy? What are you doing? And Harry says, so, do I assume correctly that you would prefer to have a spider that might come into our house and it might kill a lot of people? Is that what you prefer? You know? I mean, that I think is not a bad response to folks who say, oh, so you would rather have Saddam Hussein still around? Well, there's lots to talk about, but I want to make sure we have lots of time for questions. I would just say that, you know, this moral stuff this religious stuff, which is so pernicious, it seems to me. When George Tenet writes his memoirs, he talks about the chair of the estimate, which said that Iraq had all manner of weapons of mass destruction. And how does he describe him? Anybody read George Tenet's thing? I don't suggest you do, but he's a Mormon bishop. A Mormon bishop. And General Hayden, who used to head up the biggest employer in this county, I understand, when he was lusting after the job of director of the CIA, whose job description included and still includes torturing people. At his confirmation proceedings, he bragged about the fact that he was the recipient of 18 years of Catholic education. I'm looking at the TV, I'm saying, wow, how many did you have, McGovern? And I counted them up. 17. I missed the crucial year where they teach you that torture is okay, that you can go out and lie about things, and it seems to be okay. And I'm still looking for the university to come back and do that final year so I can get that. I mean, give me a break. You know, Hayden is a good case in point. At NSA, and some of you may know this, there's the first commandment. And the first commandment is, thou shalt not eavesdrop on other Americans without a court warrant. Everybody knew that, especially Hayden. And so the story goes that after 9/11, everything changed. And so Hayden, when asked at his confirmation proceedings why he obeyed that order, he said, well, I thought long and hard about it, and then I decided I could not do what the president ordered. It's all male bovine excrement, folks. You know why? We learned 3 weeks ago that General Hayden, in February of 2001, 7 months or whatever it is before 9/11, authorized feelers out to AT&T, Verizon, and Quest to collect all the information on telephone calls from you and me, okay? Now, that was long before 9/11. Who does he think he's kidding? Did you get that out of the mainstream media? No. But it came out of an enterprising journalist at the Denver Post or whatever it is, and he saw the court records and found out that there was one company that stood up to that. That was Quest. Quest CEO went to his general counsel and said, can we do this? And the general counsel said, no way can we do this. It's against A, B, and C laws. And so to their credit, they turned down the business. Turned down a lot. Eventually prosecuted for other things. I don't know if there's a connection there or not. But to their credit, they turned down the business. Verizon and AT&T are making millions and millions. And now, the legislation in Congress, approved by certain committees headed by Democrats, are trying to hold AT&T and Verizon harmless for going after us, after our communications and so forth. In direct violation of the FISA law, in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So, and Chris Dodd, the senator from Connecticut, to his great credit, said, look, I've done everything I can to prevent this kind of legislation from going forward. Now I'm going to put a hold on it, a personal hold. And that's a procedural thing they can do in the Senate. And for a while, they can prevent the legislation from going forward. Now, there are ways that the Senate Majority Leader can get around that. So the senator from Connecticut, Chris Dodd, said, if it goes forward, I'm going to filibuster it. Wow. So you can prevent these kinds of things by filibustering. How many votes do you need in the Senate to make a filibuster work? Anyone?
41.
41, right. So Chris Dodd is one. How many Democrats does he need to go with him to prevent this law from holding harmless AT&T and Verizon? 40. Okay. Not 60. Who says always 60? Nancy Pelosi says always 60. We need 60 votes to get anything done. Well, that's male bovine excrement, okay? They only need 41. And that goes not only for preventing this legislation, it goes for preventing further funding of this god-awful war. But I hope that Chris Dodd prevails on this legislation, and I hope he has the guts and the moral courage to do the same for further funding bills for this god-awful war. Now, let me kind of try to wind up here and give lots of time for questions. In my old age, I've learned to listen not only to my children, but to my grandchildren. I was on TV one time, about 3 years ago now, and my wife had time to call my daughter in Oakland, California, and say, Dad's going to be on TV, you might want to watch it. So she did, and she had little Claire, who was 3 years old, my granddaughter, watching with her. And when it was over, Claire went up to my daughter Kathleen and said, Mommy, that was Grandpa. And Kathleen said, yeah. She said, well, Mommy, that means the other people are real too. Now that's cute on the surface, folks. But I would ask you to think deeper. If you don't know someone in the picture, the other people aren't real too. How many of us have a blood relative in Iraq or Afghanistan right now? 3? That's a better showing. 4. How many?
He's supposed to come home soon, though.
Okay. Thank God for that. So we had 4 out of our company here. That's better than I get in the lily white sections of Arlington. It's not at all what I get when I preach at Baptist churches in Greensboro, North Carolina. When I ask that question there, half of the people in the church, their hands go up. There's a big story in that, folks. That's big. That's really big. And I have a little tale to tell you about experience I had in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. Anybody know where Pewaukee is? You do. Where is it?
In Wisconsin.
It's right outside of? Right, okay. Now this is sort of, Pewaukee is to Milwaukee like Bethesda or Arlington is to Washington. Pretty affluent, pretty well-heeled folks live there. So I was giving a lecture there, and when I finished, there was a little group gathered around me, about 30 folks, and one very well-dressed young man, about 35, came up to me and said, Mr. McGovern, what is your problem? I don't understand what your problem is. So I said, I beg your pardon? He says, well, you don't deny that we need the oil, do you? I said, no. I mean, half of my lecture was about the need for oil, and peak oil and all that. He says, well, then you have to concede that 3 or 4 GIs killed every week is a very small price for the oil that we need. Now, I looked around at those 30 folks, those 30 other folks. Now, this was, this is not one-on-one. And they were not feeling what I was feeling. They were just interested in how I might reply to that. And I said, my God, he's saying what I think a lot of Americans underneath their conscious level sort of accept. So I said, well, how do I handle this? I said, well, I'll use the utilitarian answer. I'll say, well, my problem is they're not going to let us do it, okay? They're not going to let us do it. There are 26, at that time there were 26 million Iraqis in Iraq. Now there are about 23 million, if that. 23 million Iraqis in Iraq. They feel real strongly about our occupying or taking their own. They're not going to let us have it. Besides that, there are 1.3 billion, I repeat, billion Muslims in the world. They watch what's going on TV every night. They're not going to let us do it. It's not going to we're the sole remaining superpower in the world, and we can do what we want. So then I said, there's got to be a thing. I said, well, suppose one of those young men killed last week was your son. Well, it wouldn't be my son. Well, it wouldn't be his son, folks. And that is a huge part of the problem. I got so angry at that I decided I'd have a little fun with him. I said, are you one of those folks that would like to have the 10 Commandments introduced into the schoolhouses? Oh yeah, that'd be a really good idea. I said, well, a little rusty, but I think there's one that says, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's oil." I mean, goods. There's one about stealing. There's one about lying about it. There's one about killing, it seems to me. And oh, there's one about the one that says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, as if God is on our side." So maybe you ought to subtract those 5 and introduce 5 commandments into it. He got really ticked off at that. And went to his SUV and sped off. I just ask you to reflect on whether this cynical propaganda offensive that says these terrorists are after our way of life, they're trying to destroy our way of life, what that translates to in the minds of Americans. What's our way of life? Is it more than $3.25 a gallon? You know? I think we have to examine our consciences. Maybe not so much here, but reach out to our neighbors and say, you know, are you really prepared to still more of the blood of our men and women? Keep this mirage of seizing control of the oil, making cheap oil available to us. I don't know if that's right or not. I'd like to conclude here, but I want to just refer to a couple of things here that seem to be relevant. When all this started happening, I started to get really angry. Like even before the war, when I saw that it couldn't be prevented, our first memorandum to the president on February 5, 2003, the same day as Colin Powell stood up and told those lies to the UN. We set that as our objective. Some of us are sort of long in the tooth now, you know, and we didn't know if we'd be up to a same-day analysis of what he said, like we used to do for Brezhnev or Ho Chi Minh or whatever. Well, we got something out at 5 o'clock and got on the AFP wire. What we said, there were 3 things basically. Number 1, we gave Paul Powell an A for performance and a C- for content. And of course, if we knew then what we know now, we would have flunked him outright. I told the president that there are people in your administration, first and foremost the vice president, that are doing their very best to tilt the analysis against reality, and you ought to be aware of that. And we finished up with this sentence, of which we're somewhat proud. We said, Mr. President, we strongly advise you to broaden the circle of your advisors beyond those already bent on a war for which we see no compelling reason and from which we believe the unintended consequences are likely to be catastrophic. Now, thanks, but welcome to catastrophe, folks, because that's where we are now. We can talk a little bit later about how we might extricate ourselves. But it was a no-brainer. Scott Ritter, others who know about what's going on, they were all saying the same thing, and the president went ahead and did it. So we were kind of angry, and as my anger didn't subside, and I got to feeling guilty because I come out of New York, and you're not supposed to be angry all the time. You know, in the Bronx where I grew up, you know, you could be angry for a day or 2 days tops. If you were Irish, it could be a week. I was angry all the time. And then I remember something I learned in college. And this may be encouraging to those of you who are from college. Sometimes something sticks in your craw. And at Fordham, we had to study a lot of Thomas Aquinas. Okay. Now, he was pretty awful on some things he didn't know about, like women. But he was very good on some things, I think, like virtue. And he grappled with defining virtue. He brought that old Pythagorean idea where virtue's in the middle, okay? So too much of anything is no good, too little is also no good. So take courage, for example. Courage is just enough of what you need. Foolhardiness, no good. Timidity, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, no good, okay? Now, he ranted against the fact that there was no word in Latin, the language in which he wrote, for the virtue of anger. Hear that, folks? The virtue of anger. Just enough anger. They went back to John Chrysostom, 4th century father of the church, who said, he or she who is not angry when there is just cause for anger sins. Why? Because anger respici bonum justitiae. Anger looks to the good of justice, and if you can live amid injustice without anger, you are unjust. And Thomas added his own little corollary to that. He said, the best translation is unreasoned patience. And he really got very upset about what he called unreasoned patience because he said it sows the seeds of vice, nourishes negligence, and encourages not only evil people, but good people to do evil. Now let's think, folks, about unreasoned patience. We can think glibly about, oh yeah, those Germans back in 1933, 34, 35, yeah, there's a good example of unreasoned patience. But what about us? What about us? Now I know this is a crowd that doesn't need a lot of encouragement, but we're not doing enough, folks, because it's not working. We have to continue to strive and to do more and not show unreasoned patience. Now most of you know that the Germans did not measure up. I feel very strongly about this, very much identified with this period, because I was alive for the whole Second World War. I was born a week before Hitler sent his tanks into Poland. Not only that, but I spent 5 years in Germany, where I had all manner of opportunity to ask young and old, why was it, why could it possibly be that you, among the most educated, the most cultured people in the Western world, how could you not find your voice? How could you not stand up to Hitler, who did most of his things very legally with things like the Patriot Act, things like, things that extraordinary measures and stuff. How could it be that your churches could not find their voice when Jews were being carted off to concentration camps, when they could see what was going on? When Hitler, and many of you probably don't know this, Hitler insisted that there be a priest in every parish in Germany, whether it was Catherine, whether it was Catholic, or Lutheran. Why? Because he felt that would be a force for stability for his regime, and it was. Now, we have this torture going on in this country, folks. Where are the churches? Where are the institutional churches, the synagogues, even the mosques? Where is the moral authority in this country? Well, you know what? We're in, folks. We have to accept that responsibility. We can't be looking elsewhere. We can't be looking for a great white father or somebody else to do it for us. We got to do it. Congress has shown that they're not up to it. We've got to do it ourselves. And there is such a thing as too late. That's something that Martin Luther King said. This Riverside. Let me just choose one, and this is Granny Haddock. Some of you know Granny Haddock. She's, 95 now or something. She used to walk across the country. This is what she said. Aren't we privileged to live in a time when everything is at stake, and when our efforts make a difference in the eternal contest between the forces of light and shadow, between togetherness and division, between justice and exploitation? Be joyful that you are a warrior in this great time. And I think we need to end on this sense of joy. People who tell me they're discouraged, I remember back to my freshman year at Fordham, when I was being piled on with work and work and work, academic work. I was trying to play basketball, and I went to Father Tim Healy, who was my English professor. He ended up being the president of Georgetown. And I went to him and I said, I'm discouraged. He turned on me. He said, what did you say? And I got mad and I said, I'm disgusted. He said, good. I thought you said discouraged. Disgusted is good. Discouraged, not allowed. Okay? I remember that to this day. We can't let ourselves be discouraged. As I say, if you could be where I am here, you wouldn't be discouraged anymore because there are enough of us. We can make an impact. We just have to do things a little differently than we have been doing. When people say, what do we do? Well, earlier today I said what you do is you get together with a small circle of trusted friends, people you really trust, whose judgment makes a difference. I've learned from servant leadership school and other places that you don't do these things alone, okay? You do it in community. The only thing to be sure of is that you make sure that you have at least one woman, preferably 2 or 3 in this circle. Why? Because it's the women that are showing the leadership in this movement. It's the women that have the intuition and the courage to make a difference. Let me give you an example. Cindy Sheehan, Ann Wright, Rachel Curry, who stood in the way of a bulldozer to prevent a house being demolished in Gaza. These are the folks that I think of when I'm sitting there listening to Rumsfeld weave more lies in front of us, and I'm saying to myself, oh, it's awful. Should I get up and no. Oh, should I not? And I think, well, you know, Cindy Sheehan wouldn't be having this conversation with herself. What kind of a wuss are you, McGovern? And so I get up there, and that's what got me up in front of that microphone. So that's important. Make sure that you have a woman in your circle, and then figure it out, folks. Figure out something that you haven't imagined yet. It'll come. It'll come. It may take, you know, a weekly meeting for a month or so, but it'll come, and the times require it, because, you know, there is such a thing as too late. We have to make sure that we make an impact, I think, still in the political process with our representatives and senators. If Mikulski and Cardin can't support Chris Dodd from Connecticut, then they ought to hear from you guys, you know? They ought to hear from you, because all he needs is 40, right? If he gets 2 from Maryland, he's rolling along, you know? If Chris Dodd can't hear from them supporting his decision to filibuster this god-awful law that holds AT&T and Verizon harmless for listening into our conversations, then, you know, we're not doing our job. And there are lots of other stuff. And so, why do I mention this? I think that there are 2 reasons why impeachment is just mandatory. One is to keep faith, not only with our founders, but with all those folks. Some of you watch the Ken Burns stuff, I'm sure, on TV. All those folks that died to protect the freedoms that we enjoy, or have enjoyed up till now, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is a tactical thing. If Admiral Fallon is given the order to implement Plan A and attack Iran, he might be able to think to himself, now, why am I doing this? Iran is no threat to our country, no nuclear weapon for several years, messing around in Iraq, yeah, but we're messing around in Iran. Impeachment proceedings have started in Washington. Could that be what this is all about? Could this be an order to save the political hides of a deserter during Vietnam and a guy who had 5 draft deferments? Is that what this is all about? Mr. President, I would like you to put me on the retirement list. I cannot in good faith implement your order. I'm going down to AP, and I tell the Associated Press what the President has ordered me to do and why I won't do it, in hopes that my successor, like Ruckelshaus, if those of you go back to Watergate, that he too will refuse to implement the order. Now, what do I think the chances are of that happening? 20% maybe, 30%. But if impeachment proceedings begin, then our military have something to hang their hat on and say, look, this is a political process. The president is in real danger. I'm not going to start a regional war to save his political hide. I think that might speak to a person like Admiral Fallon, who by all reports is a fairly balanced, incredible person for a naval officer when prejudice comes to it.